All
Okay, thanks
right.
very much.
Yeah, go ahead. Let me just start off introducing this as kind of a special CIF office hours. Sam Ward has decided to grace us with his presence all the way from the other side of the world. And we're going to be recording these and sharing it with everybody that wants to. So Sam, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, James. Thanks very much. And I'll just start off by trying to slow down my accent. I'm based in Australia, and I've been told many times that we speak very, very quickly. And I'm part of Australia where we have quite an interesting accent. It's a little bit more different. So I'll definitely try and keep it a little slower. But if you have any questions throughout any of the presentation, please just jump in and ask. As James talked about, my name's Sam. My background is I used to be an aspiring tennis player. I wanted to be a professional tennis player, and unfortunately, I didn't make it. I actually failed quite miserably, but it's led to a lot of different skills that I've acquired to this day, and that's actually what brought me into the world of gaming and esports. Is at the start of COVID, a co-founder of mine reached out, who's based in Vancouver, and he was applying to try and play for a Counter-Strike team at his company at AWS, where they wanted to compete for charity and try and the winners got to pick a charity of their choice to give $100,000 to. And he wasn't good enough to make the team, even though he had a background in the game, which was quite funny to us at the time because he'd been playing a fair bit. But he called me up and asked me, could I help him create a training plan or a way to get better at Counter-Strike in a more efficient way? Because of my background in tennis, I used to work with a lot of young athletes here in Australia who were aspiring to go to the colleges in the US on a scholarship or to be a professional tennis player. And we sat down and we came up with some concepts and ideas of, well, how can you approach gaming in a different way to what currently exists out there in the world of gaming and esports? And what we found is, within the research that I did and my co-founder helped me with, is we were actually more confused at the second week of research than we were at the start of gaming. And we started to realize that gaming is so different to the way that you approach different things. And the amount of information out there is fantastic, but it's quite scattered and you get quite lost. So as an adult, we started to ask ourselves the question, like, well, if we're getting lost, and this is my background, is helping people get better at something and a skill, like, what would it feel like if you were a person who actually had a dream to be a high-level gamer? Where would you start? If you're 12 years old, how do you put this together to understand what to do next? And then as we started to go down the road and develop out our training programs, we started to meet teachers, and they said exactly the same thing we'd gone to, is I just not sure where to go at times and how do I help many different games at the same time when I'm maybe more skilled at one than the other. So that's very much our story, and that's where Valor Esports started. So today what I would really like to focus on and what I'd really like to talk to everyone here about and potentially get some questions at the end is the philosophy of coaching and what we came up with. And then additionally, I want to talk about actually running a session in class and how that philosophy fits into it. And that's the other thing I want to leave you guys with, is just to really understand that Valor Esports is at a stage where it's trying to help empower the dream of gamers. Our goal is to see how many gamers can we get to take their skills and apply it to create opportunities for themselves. So if that be to get into a team in their university, or even to have higher honors and play at a professional level, that is what we exist to do. And that's what our goal is how many pathways can we create through your ability to play at a really high level, but making sure you're learning in a really efficient way. At this stage, I'll talk a little bit at the end about how we do this, but we're essentially working with around 300 students at the moment across Australia, the US, and a few in the UK. And we've got about 250 different versions of drills that people can apply. And right now we've got quite a high satisfaction rating with the students coming through. So we're really proud of that. And we feel like we're on the right journey with what we're doing. But to start off, I want to talk about our philosophy and how we apply our training methods. And this is essentially being taken directly from my background in sports, which is the 4 stages of competence. And first stage is unconscious incompetence. And if we apply that to the idea of gaming, it essentially is from that beginner level of where do you actually start and how do you know what to actually work on? If you don't know what you don't know, then it's really hard to know what to do next. Stage 2, which is conscious incompetence, you know what you don't know. So that's helping players to really identify what gaps exist in their knowledge of a game and what gaps can they start to fill and what is the most efficient way to do that. So a classic one with Rocket League is the mechanic, a flip reset. Every player, as soon as they learn about the game, they want to start learning it. But it turns out that that's actually completely pointless at a certain stage, at that beginner level. That's not going to actually help you play. So getting players aware of what they do know, but when are they meant to learn it? Stage 3, which is where you spend probably 90% of your time with any player if you're in the player development space, is conscious competence. So essentially the player knows how to do the skill, but they have to think about it before they actually execute. And this is the most common place as a coach, as a teacher, as any kind of player developer. You're going to spend a lot of your time doing repetition and trying to help that player turn it into muscle memory where they don't have to think, which leaves us with the last stage, unconscious competence, which is you're now able to execute a skill without thinking. So it's natural for you to do this. And this is essentially the 4 stages a player needs to go through in a set of skills across any activity, if it be a sport, a game, any kind of hobby of theirs. And it's really hard. You can start to see how many skills there are that you need to start to master to get to this level. But we'll talk a little bit about how you start to pick the strengths of a player to focus on first. So what I'd like to do is just go through each stage and how you could potentially apply it right now with just your own resources and potentially your own players. And then I want to talk a little bit about the template that we apply through our platform, but also what we provide to teachers when they're undertaking our programs. So stage 1, talking about that unconscious incompetence of how do we actually identify what exists in a game? And the easiest answer to this is a skill tree, is to make sure that you've mapped out as many different skills that exist within the game that you're looking at and working with. Now, this has been a really interesting exercise. Usually if I'm in an in-person environment and I'm working with teachers here in Australia, I'll actually get them to sit down and have a go themselves and sit down. If we pick a game of choice, it could be Mario Kart, Rocket League, Super Smash, I'll say, how many skills can you think of in 2 minutes? And what you'll see, you get very different skills, set of skill trees, obviously. Some people will go off into the mechanics side, and some people will go off into the strategy, some will go off into the mental, some will go off into the teamwork side. And I think this is a really important exercise that you can sit down and do with your current crop of players, is sit down and just ask them to actually work as a team, come up with the skill tree. And what I think is really important at this stage is not to have the perfect skill tree, but to have something that identifies those players. You know, what kind of skill trees are they developing because they're really passionate about that type of game style. And that can also start to build some sort of culture within your gaming environment, that maybe you're a team that really focuses on the skills of communication, or you're really focused on the mechanics side, or you're really team-based with passing plays or potentially different strategies. So a really good way to do that is to actually write down a skill tree. And just for your own example, when we talk about skill trees, that's exactly what we've done from our side of our platform. You can see that we've started to break down our skill trees into different mechanics or fundamentals. And the further you go down, the more it keeps growing. And you can see that there's quite a lot in this skill tree has been developed by professional players that work within our environment. But this is the kind of activity you want to go on with your players, is to help them understand that there's just even here, and this is still developing, there's 105 different skills that we can start to work on. And it's starting to work down, well, what are the actual fundamentals that I need to start with before I start going down into that deeper level? So it'd be exercise number 1. Have a look at your ability to develop a skill tree with your players. Stage 2, conscious incompetence. So this is when we start to, how do we take people or players from, okay, well, I'm aware now potentially that an exercise, I'll pick one that'll go up here, half volleys. So a type of shot or a type of mechanic within Rocket League, when the ball just bounces, you're not going to allow it to go over the top of your car, but you hit it just at the right time. So just as it bounces. I'm aware that's a really important skill. I understand that's probably a fundamental skill. Once I get past that bronze to silver level, that I need to know how to hit a half volley. But how do I actually teach a player that? And this is the hardest part, as I guess, as a teacher coach particularly, is, you might be really passionate about the game. You might have a really high level ability in a different game, but I need to help them with this game. And the best way that we came up with it is to follow the I do, we do, and we cross out the you do part, because the you do is in the next section. But the I do, and is essentially we find materials, we find people who are able to execute it really well, and we look at that. So we look at a professional player, or we get one of the high level players from class to take a leadership role to show us that mechanic. The other activity that we've had teachers do is actually set some fun homework where we say, well, we're going to focus on half volleys this week. I would like you to try and write down within 50 words how to execute this skill and bring it back to class. So you start to create some sort of collaboration around how you actually execute that. The we do is essentially doing it together. So how do you actually explain to a player how to execute that activity? If I was coming back to my old sporting world, I would obviously demonstrate how to do that. But if you're a player who can't, or if you're a person who can't execute that skill, which is, if you are that person, don't feel bad, because I'd say 90% of teachers I've worked with are working with players at a higher level than them. Then you need to find those examples, and that's where we start to lean towards those professional players, or potentially ex-students or collegiate players. And there's so much streaming content out there now where we can capture this. But as a teacher, you already got so much pressure on you. It's looking to lean back on the players and to take an interest in their own development, to go find those examples and bring them back to the class. How we do it from a Valor Esports perspective is we've actually set out a type of content called skill introductions. So you'll see that within skill introductions, when a player comes into a skill introduction, we want to make sure that they identify exactly the good habits and the bad habits they need to understand about that skill, but also go through that activity of, this is the I do, this is how we actually execute it from a video point of view, but also a written point of view, the tips and tricks you need to make sure to execute it well, and most importantly, the bad habits to avoid. And this is where, from a sporting background, we really want to make sure that players identify the good habits are really important, but the bad habit is even more important, to make sure they're aware when they're doing it. So how do I make sure I'm not ingraining that when I get to the next stage? Which leads us to stage 3, which is the most important. So your conscious competence. How do you start to develop a player to do 2 things? One is to create that muscle memory, so a lot of repetition. And this can be really hard in the school environment, because you might only have a lunchtime, you might only have 45 minutes or half an hour to do any kind of focus training in that time. So how do we actually create an environment where the player gets to do lots of repetition and focus on that? Not easy to do, and this is where we need to start to take a lot of inspiration from other activities. When we talk about, once again, the background sporting, I would look at a drill that starts to change what the focus of winning is. So really good example of this is I would start to look at the training packs within Rocket League, or a different type of exercise that could be repeated. So rather than playing a full match of something, I might make a rule that once a goal is scored in a certain way, the match is over and it's finished, meaning that the players are making a really strong focus on executing that skill. And as soon as it happens, we all stand up and re-rotate as a class as fast as possible to get going again, making sure that the players now identify the importance of trying to execute that skill in the match environment, rather than just playing the match as they would in a home environment. The other part to this is starting to create belief in the skill. And this is something that I think when we talk about transferable skills in esports, this is where we really can get something out of it. So it's making sure that we're setting tasks that are going to create that repetition, but also not going to be easily achievable. One of the hardest parts of this is creating time constraints. So the way that we start to do it, and we do it with teachers in Australia, is we start to set time limits on everything they do. So asking one of your high level players, particularly, reducing the time that they have to actually execute either a training pack or an activity within a match environment at training is really, really important. So that starts to challenge them And if they're able to start executing it, then it starts to create that belief that when they go to the next stage, which is that muscle memory, in a match, it's going to start to feel like they're comfortable executing it. So something I really want you to have a think about is how are you building that repetition potentially? And the way that we've had to come across it and our solution to it is, once again, coming back to platform environment, is our EDrills. So we broke up the idea of how do we actually teach someone the mechanics in the skill introduction point of view. Now we're going to bring them across to a focus on different drills that exist within a game. And how do we get them to really understand what activities they can do, if it be in free play or if it be within a training pack environment. How do we make sure that they're getting a repetition to make sure that they can really focus on what they're doing from a development point of view? And we've also, from Valor Esports perspective, we've got a way to track their results so that they can make sure that they're actually improving on that activity every time they do it. If I've been in the classroom environment, my big tip here is to make sure that you have some sort of structure to what you're doing, so that essentially you have your warm-up, you have your skill introduction or your focus of the day. What is the skill that we're going to look at? And if you're someone who doesn't feel like you're able to present that because you don't have the ability in this game, then I'd be starting to create some sort of leadership roles, if it be team captains or the people that can come up and present what they're going to focus on the day. And then I would have a drill to do, which would be either a training pack, everyone has a go in a group environment, or we have match play, but I'm going to alter what winning is. So I might make the scoring rules very different. I might give disadvantages to certain players to make sure that they can't score. If they do score without potentially passing the ball 3 times, then it doesn't count. So starting to give a really big focus on the restraints to get the results you want. And then I would finish with match play, where I'd reward players for trying to execute the thing we've been working on the whole session. Which leads me to our final stage. And believe it or not, this is actually the easiest stage, because if a player is at this stage, then they're able to execute the skill that you might have been focusing on for the term or the week at a really high level. The only thing we really need to do in this situation is put them into match environments. And when we start to try to convert the sporting experience, if I had a player back in the tennis days who was at this level, what we would be doing is asking the question before they play, what are we going to focus on? So rather than letting them go out with a free mind where they can think about whatever they want, we start to set some boundaries around, well, you're about to play a match as a team or as an individual. You've been working on half volleys or potentially aerials. What would be a really good outcome for you in this match? So rather than just winning or losing, what is going to be a really positive thing for you to try and focus on? And they might say, I'm looking to do, when I get the opportunity to play really positively with half volleys, I'm going to try and hit as many half volleys as possible. And then at the end of the match, winning or losing, that's not a problem. What I'm going to be asking is the question is, how do you think you went with that? So you're starting to get some self-evaluation happening with the player and getting to really understand where they're at. And this is going to help them measure if they really have created muscle memory or not. And if they haven't, then as a coach, we actually go all the way back to stage 1 and start to identify what information might be missing that will unlock them. And that's when we start to get that performance evaluation, or we get that performance mindset from a player, which we can help us start to develop high-level players. What I'm just going to touch on is we've got these 4 stages, and they're quite theory-based. They're quite hard to make sure that we get always correct. But when we do work with a player, we're essentially breaking it down into, does this player understand that this skill exists? Does this player understand how to do the skill? Does this player know how to practice the skill? And then the 4th stage being, can this player execute this activity in a match environment? And that's how we simplify it down. The last piece I would like to touch on before we kind of get any questions, potential questions, is what does this look like from a class environment point of view, if we had to make it nice and simple? So from a really basic point of view, and I've just given an example around 45 minutes. I'm not sure if that's your case. Some people do get extra time potentially after school hours, or if you're in a lunch environment, but you might have less time. But I'm essentially going through 3 main stages. The first stage is the warm-up and just getting players ready to train. So quite often in the warm-up, that's what you want to do, a lot more fun activities. You want to get people I guess moving and thinking as fast as possible, having a lot more fun, getting that positive environment, which isn't too hard to do. There's lots of different ways you can do that with different variations of the game. I want to be asking, is there any homework that we have to do, if it be researching a different mechanic within the game or a different strategy, just very quickly. Then I want to be moving across to what is the focus of today? What is that level 2 of explaining what this activity is with the I do, we do. So spending 5 minutes to actually explain. In our case, we would use a skill introduction video, but you might get your chance to get one of your team captains up or your leaders to get up to explain what the activity is of the week. What is the focus of this training? Then I would have 2 different variations of a drill. So in this example, the focus was kickoff training for beginners. And we go through, well, what are the important parts of kickoff training? Trying to get in front of the ball and the goal to make sure that there's a rebound or a 50-50, that it's not going to bounce straight into my own goal. So from a drill perspective, what we're actually going to do is we're going to have 1v1 matches. And if you can score off the kickoff, it's worth 2 points. So you're getting players to really over-exaggerate their focus on that first kickoff experience. You could make this even faster and harder if you wanted to. You might say you've got about 10 seconds to score after the kickoff, or you've got to reset or restart. And there's lots of different variations you go through here. What I would do for the second variation is increase the importance on the worth of a kickoff goal. So really trying to get the players to over-exaggerate, again, their focus and their care factor for kickoffs. So the goals within the game of Rocket League are worth 1, but if you get 1 off a kickoff, it's now worth 6 points because you got 5 plus the 1. So you can imagine the mindset of a young person. They get quite excited about that. And now the idea of just driving around and doing other things isn't the focus. It's trying to get that player to really completely focus on the skill at hand, getting that repetition in place. Then to finish off, I would go into general match play to make sure that players still developing that match environment, that competitive environment, but keeping an eye out for which players are still trying to apply what the focus was for the day, and really keeping an eye on that. I have testing in place here because in the Valor Esports platform, we obviously have what I showed before, which is that ability to test objectives. So what we see with a lot of schools that I work with here in Australia is in their match play, they might take a couple of players to go away and do on a different console or desktop, is just do their testing for the week so that the teacher can start capturing some data on who's actually improving in that skill and how are they tracking, so they can make sure that they can see, well, that player's moving in the right pace, or they might be actually going backwards, or which we don't really see, because once you start practicing something within a game environment, it seems to improve quite quickly. But this structure alone has been part of the reason that we've seen a high level of satisfaction from the players, is that in particular, any of the high level players, potentially if you have some beginners with 1 or 2 better players in the environment, this is what's making them feel more challenged. And it's giving them a bit more focus rather than going into matches and essentially destroying the lower level players, because you can start to set some boundaries around those high level players of giving them harder tasks to achieve before they can just win the match. And I think that's really, really important, is getting that framework in place and making sure that they feel really comfortable around this environment of, we're going to go through this structure. You're definitely going to work on something that is really, really important to your development as a player, and then you'll get the match play at the end, and you'll be able to go through that focus. Now, I'm going to move into Q&A in a second. I'm not sure if anyone in this room is aware, but essentially we're offering an 8-week program for free to the end of 2023. So if you're someone who wants to give this a go and put this kind of structure into your environment, NASEF and Valor have joined up essentially to see what we can offer and how we can help. And I want to put it out there at the moment that we'd love to have as many testers on board for this 8-week free program as possible. It gives us a chance as an organization to really understand how we can help people who are not based in Australia. How can we develop better tools to make sure that as teachers, you can come in, you don't feel like you have to do more work, but you can actually have some support within this environment across not just Rocket League, but Mario Kart, Super Smash Brothers, and potentially, if you have senior players, Valorant. And it would be great to have you on board. And I also want to put it out there, as I've come into the gaming world, I've seen that there's quite a few different people out there trying to, I guess, make as much money as possible out of the esports world. Our main focus is why we're doing it for free, is we want to see how we can help as long as possible, build up our tools to make sure they're as valuable as possible for students and teachers before we start offering any kind of cash incentives, I guess, for our product. So love to have you on board for 2023. Come have a go, provide the feedback, see if it helps your players the way that we've seen it help the players within Australia. And yeah, I'd love to have you on board and join the family. Any questions? If you haven't got a huge amount of questions, I'm just going to ask, is there anyone here who thinks they'll be able to get some of their senior players or potentially their stronger players to get on board with the idea around the skill tree? So I just saw Alex has a question there. Yeah, answer that question, Alex, is it's already started. So it's self-run program. So you're able to just essentially start when you want to start. And we don't capture any data from the players. We don't take any personal data. How it works is we send you the licenses that they can log into. And then you can just hand out those licenses, but it's got a generic login to the player of your choice. So you can kind of just know this player, if it be Johnny or Sarah, they have license 1, 2, or 3. And that way, we don't know who the player is, but you can still have a look at their data and keep a track of how they're traveling and maybe move it on to someone else if they're no longer part of the program down the track. So it's all up to you. What we do is we try to stay engaged on a weekly basis and just check in that you feel comfortable using the tools and that the training is actually effective. And when you do run into issues, that's when we can start to learn how we can make it better. But yeah, if anyone does have any questions around, I'd love to know if they feel like they could even just implement the skill tree concept with some of their players. I think that's a really good starting point, is to next time you're at training is actually get some large sheets of paper out and get your players to try it. How many skills can they come up with? And see where they're at as individuals or as groups. How well do they understand the game compared to different players? And like I said, when you look at our skill tree and you look at what we're doing, we've got skill building on it, but we've identified 103 different skills that you could potentially master. So there's a lot to go through.
Yeah, the question in the chat's really awesome. The idea that can you expand to League of Legends or Overwatch in the future? I think just looking at the side, I think I see that they're already starting on some of those. I know that they're starting on some of the other programs, but I just want to chime in that everything that you've talked about today has been fantastic. And I really do like how applicable it is, no matter what game you're talking about. So when he was describing some of the exercises for Rocket League specifically, I'm more of a League of Legends player at heart. So like my initial thought was, okay, so you could set your kids up in a game where they get rewarded based on how many last hits they have in laning phase for League of Legends. Or you could reward them for, how quickly they clear their jungle camps if you want to train up your jungler. Or in Overwatch, if you start looking at like how quickly do they get to the capture point. Or a lot of these other things are like how fluently do they know each of their maps. Like hide and seek in the map, then call out a location, and then somebody goes and finds that player. Like ways to kind of adapt this concept to other games could be really useful.
Yeah, it's a great question, Alex. We are going to move into League of Legends. So the funny thing with League of Legends is our structure needs to be adapted slightly because of the skill sets that actually are required for that game. Obviously, the mechanics that James just spoke about at the start are really vital, important. But once they hit that slightly higher level, it becomes this almost like this, this ability to retain understanding of what your strategies are. Some of the things that we've already started to test out is we actually, because the communication aspect of League of Legends is so high, we actually have different drill activities where the players have to jump up if they haven't spoken for the last 10 seconds and things like that. So trying to get them, aware that when they're not talking to each other, that there's not a punishment, but there's something to trigger them to be aware of it and make them not want to jump up and run around, or, I want to stay down and focus. So they start to become much more efficient at that communication aspect. And you can see how, our goal of, well, if we can't make you a professional gamer, our second goal is to get you into a college and play at a high level in the college. But the most important underpinning activity that we need to do is transfer real skills that we know are effective. And that's kind of where my story is, where I failed at tennis, but I've got so many other skills around communication, around coaching, around organizing people. And that's where it starts with that high performance attitude of, how can I make myself as good as possible at my strength in this game? It might not always be the mechanic, but it might be you're a great communicator. It might be that you're a great strategist, and just identifying that and trying to convert this into activities. But we're definitely expanding. The Super Smash program is definitely not as well developed. We're going into beta testing at the moment, and we will look to launch on the 1st of January next year. So I think the CIF program started next year. So we're kind of, now that we found that out, we're going to try and aim to make that available. But it definitely will look, what you see on my screen right now, this is our current training program for the beginner level for Rocket League. And you can see that each week is broken down into 3 sessions. So you have an in-class session, which is essentially provides the ability for you to have a look at the templates that we create. So that's the same template we showed before, just a little bit more pretty, and just showing the actual activities that you need to do. So what to do with each player. Each activity we do will have that for each week. So, in the class, this is exactly what I can do, and I can follow this template. And then we have optional homework for the players, so they can actually come in and have a look at the activities that they can do at home or at their own time. Optional, obviously, they don't have to do it, but it's an option for them to take under more structured training. And that looks similar to a workout program. So you can see there's three drills that they need to do. They can start their activity. They can watch the video, which explains what the actual activity is and how to do it. And they can enter their result here as well. So the players can go through that and finish their own at-home homework. Each one takes around half an hour, so it's not too much. And what we're finding is this is where we're getting a lot of the development from the players at the moment, where they're actually spending at least half an hour of their gaming time practicing a skill before they play matches. And that's where we're getting some really positive results with players, which is super exciting to see. Great. Well, to throw out the questions.
Yeah.
Sorry. I saw partnering with the folks at Skill Capped. Definitely, we're willing to partner with anyone, but I haven't. Mobalytics. I hope I pronounced that correctly. That sounds really cool. I'll definitely have a look into
the League of Legends one, right?
Okay, I'll have to have a look. I am really excited to move into League of Legends because it's such an interesting challenge for us. It's a different style, and I think there's going to be a lot more quiz-based activities there to see how fast a player can actually identify what they should do in a certain moment. As the fundamentals only go so far at the moment for us, it's got to be how to get players through that especially that tough middle level up to that top level. Fantastic.
Hey,